Greetings all. Welcome to another session here of Tuzi Talks. Today we're in our series on language assessment. In particular, we're going to be talking about alternatives in assessments today. Remember, most of this is coming from our textbook by Brown and Prinvadia, Language Assessment Principles and Classroom Practices. It's right over there. And you may want to take a look at that text to learn more about what we're talking about. Today we're going to be focusing on these, as I said before, these alternatives in assessments. So we'll look at some ideas regarding the practicality and the reliability versus authenticity in materials that we use. We'll talk a little bit about washback. We'll spend a lot of time on performance-based assessments, and we'll finish up with self and peer assessments. Before I begin, though, let's just talk a little bit about the assessment process. As you know, assessment is a big word, and it's generally this big thing that covers things like exams, but it also covers other types and ways of doing assessments, whether they're formative assessments, assessments that you do as you go along within a course, or assessments that are larger, that are more summative, and we're finishing up what we're doing, and we're doing something like the end of a semester, end of a quarter, end of a major section, okay? Those are big types of assessments, okay? You have other types of assessments that you can do as well, but oftentimes when people hear the word assessment, they're actually thinking about the smaller circle, which most people know as an exam or a test. And tests are part of the assessment process, but they're certainly not the only one, especially when you're dealing with more than just knowledge, more than just information. And in the world of language, we do have information that we need. We do need to understand the databases that we have, but it's more than just the databases. It does involve skills, so it's going to be a larger circle when we talk about assessment. The problem is that a lot of people have this idea that tests are the panacea, you know, and that they have this aura of infallibility. They're the end all and be all. We use exams, paper-based exams, to allow people into or out of, or, kick them out of a school. We use things like the TOEFL test, which is, in large measure, it's not as much as it was in the past, but in large measure, it is the test. There's not a lot of performance that's involved. Like I say, nowadays they have the written segment and they have the spoken segments, and so they are trying to expand that. But it is still that one measure that they're using. And oftentimes when they talk about other types of things, other types of assessment, they use the phrase alternative assessments, like a portfolio as an alternative to an exam. The authors here are saying, it shouldn't actually be called an alternative. It's an extra type. It's another part of the whole assessment scheme that's out there. So it should be alternatives in assessments, and that's why they wrote it this way. It's not an alternative assessment, it's alternatives. There are a variety of things out there that you can do. And so when you're talking about these alternatives beyond the test, what should they look like? What types of qualities should they entail? And this that you're looking at right here is a list of some qualities that the authors added as far as what they think might be things that you want to include. You want to require that students are creative or that they produce. Again, you look at a test and it's not producing other than, ABCD or writing one word, but some of the alternatives is that you have them produce. You have them use the skills that they have. So you let them produce something. You let them be creative with something. That would be one requirement. You want to make sure that the materials that you create are authentic texts. Try to get something that's actually out there in the real world and not something that you're just making up for the case of making it up. The other things that you're going to want to have in here are that you want to include activities that are an extension of the classroom. Make sure that what you're doing are actually in your classroom is actually being extended beyond. And the assessment is going to be the opposite, where you have an activity that can go beyond the classroom, but it's part of the classroom. So in other words, it's going to be real life, it's going to be practical. You also want to make sure, number 4 here, that you're going to be assessing normal classroom activities. Again, you want the classroom activities to be practical and meaningful, but you want to be assessing normal classroom activities. So again, 4 and 5 kind of go together there. So make those activities things that they're going to be using out in the real world, things that they're going to be using in their other classes. so that, again, it's useful and meaningful and thereby more motivating to the students. Number 5, as I said, meaningful and instructional tasks. Make sure that there are activities or projects that are going to actually help their students. If you're teaching students and you're going to be working on a science project because in another class they have a science project that they're doing, well, that's going to be something that's meaningful and instructional for those students. You can work on the skills and the databases that they need in order to do that. Number 6, focus on both the product and the process. Now, years ago, when I was learning to become a writing teacher, there was always this debate when you look at a final essay that a student hands out. Well, that's a product, and that's what you should be focusing on. And there were other teachers who were saying, no, wait a minute. In order to get to that final product, we need to know what the process is so that we can arrive at that final location of an end product. And so there was always this debate that's going on. There's also the debate between those who say, I want to know the structure and teach the structure, as opposed to those who I want them to understand the mental processes that's going on so that they can arrive at this in more of an intuitive fashion, so that writing becomes more intuitive to them. You've got these debates that are going on. And I agree with the authors that you need to focus both on the product and you need to focus on the process, especially when you're dealing with academic writing. You may be in a literature course and they want you to be more creative, but when you're in a business writing course that's going to require you to write up a business proposal, they're going to want less creativity and they're going to want more detail to that proper structure. Not that it's right or wrong, it's just the way it is. So you want to work on both ends of this. Number 7, the activities that you use in the assessment should use higher order thinking skills. Critical thinking, as that's called. And so you want to try to include those in there so that students can learn to think for themselves, to figure out problems for themselves, which will enable them to succeed better when they go into other courses and need to use higher order thinking skills. Try to create assessments that also provide diagnostic information. Number 8. This is a benefit to the students because not only are they getting an assessment or a grade, as it were, but you're also providing information about what they know, what they don't know, what they need to know. And that's going to help them further their language education, further their language abilities. Also, by providing diagnostic information to your students, they're going to be able to focus on those weaknesses by themselves. They'll be able to become more independent learners. Number 9, take into account multiculturalism. Not all cultures are the same, and there are going to be things that you do that you think are fine and no problem, and they're not going to be in someone else's culture. I was just listening to some comedian online the other day, and it was his first trip to the Middle East as a comedian, and they call out his name, and he comes out on stage, and it is at that point that he realizes that the country that he's in segregates men and women. And they were all there, and they all had a great time, but it wasn't in his mind to think that, the women are going to be on one side and the men are going to be on the other side. No. You may be doing something in a class and you may think, oh, this is appropriate, when in fact in their culture it may not be. Now, I'm not saying that, you don't do that. You shake somebody's hand, but in somebody's culture, handshaking is not done. Well, this is an opportunity to educate them. Oh, I understand that that's not appropriate in your culture, but in this culture it is appropriate, and so please don't be offended. They're not trying to offend you, and you don't take it as an offense. It's a good opportunity to teach about multiculturalism. Now, at the same time, you want to show them that you respect their culture as well, and so maybe for them you don't do whatever it is that you did or said in the future. But it's a great opportunity for both sides to learn. And that's number 9. Number 10, teachers should perform the assessments and then disclose the ratings. Let students know this is what you're being graded on. These are the components that you're doing. We'll talk a little bit more about rubrics later on, but it's a great thing because students know this is what I'm up against. Typically, when students learn test-taking techniques and they come to a reading section, a good teacher is always going to tell them, don't read the section first. Read the questions first. And that way you'll know what it is you're being quote-unquote tested for. They're going to know what the answers to look for because they've read the questions first. It's the same type of an idea. You give them the ways that they're going to be rated ahead of time so that they know. Same thing that's done in the Olympics when anybody's doing whatever. There's a list of things that they know they have to do in order to get a top score. Whether that's running or hockey or gymnastics or whatever. They need to know what those are. Same thing here. Let them know ahead of time, and that way they're going to be better prepared to do better on those assessments, and then, of course, do better in their language learning. There's some introduction to some alternatives in assessments. It's a little graph here that we're looking at that talks about the differences between practicality and reliability, right? High practicality versus low practicality, and also the benefits of washback and authenticity. Okay, so over here is going to be high benefits for washback and authenticity, and then the other end is going to be low benefits. So this corner here is probably the worst that you're looking for. This corner up here is probably the best one that you're looking for. Now, I hope you understand this. So practicality, this is going to be, doable type of thing. It's going to be a reliable type of thing. And what's sitting up here? Standardized tests. Standardized tests I can give out to hundreds of students at the same time. Now that nowadays I can do this all digitally, I can get responses back. I can test those responses to verify that they're reliable and that they're valid. Okay, that's a nice type of test. High reliability, high practicality. It can be done. Coming down here to do a conference with all your students, individually, one by one, takes forever. It's not very practical, but it does provide authentic feedback, provides good washback from whatever things that you're doing. And so this is going to be richer information, the stuff that's at this end. Okay, the stuff that's at that end up there is going to provide a quick answer. It's going to be reliable, but it's not going to give you as rich a description of what students' abilities are. And so that's why you want to be somewhere in the middle, I would think, where you can get some reliability, some practicality, but you're also getting authentic materials that you can use, and then some good washback. You can see the dichotomy that's going on at each end. I know that when I was working overseas and I had to give out a speaking exam, right? I couldn't make it. I had 50 students. 50 students times 10 minutes a student, you're talking about a large chunk of time. And so I had to minimize the way that was done if I had all those students. I wanted to do that. I wanted to be down here and say, let's do individual things. It would have been nice. It simply wasn't practical to do. I didn't have the time to get it done. I do want to do that, okay, but it's just more difficult to do. Nowadays, what's happening is that students are recording things and then sending them into someone who reviews them in batch. And it's going to be a little easier to do it that way. But you see the dichotomy that's going on here between the high level, high reliability, and the high authentic washback. You got that dichotomy that's going on. It's something that you want to look at. The best thing, in my opinion, is to have something that would be called triangulated, or a layered approach to assessment. So you've got practicality, and you've got an exam here, but you also have a paper here, and you also have an interview here, and you've got layers of assessments that you can use to provide a richer, more robust type of assessment beyond just a number, beyond just a grade. Also means that you can work together with other people and provide different opinions as well. Again, it's going to be a richer description. It's going to be less objective in some sense, even though you're going to be using a rubric because you're dealing with language. But it's going to be a better description than simply a number. Quote, although standardized tests provide a practical and reliable means of assessment, triangulated, layered approaches to assessment will yield more reliability and offer much needed encouragement and washback. You're going to get much more detail for that individual. So this quote here is one that I would definitely recommend you take advantage of. Yes, you can use the standardized test, but you also want to have triangulated, multi-layered approach. It's going to be better for your students, and it's going to provide you a better description of what your students actually know and how they've progressed. Quote, how well did the characteristics of a task correlate to the target language? How likely will the language task actually be performed in the real world? I pulled this out of the text as well, but it's two questions that you want to be asking as you're developing a performance-based assessment. What do I mean by a performance-based assessment? Performance-based assessment is where you're having them actually do something. They will give a speech. They will do a presentation. They will conduct research and talk to people. They will perform or write a paper, a variety of things that they can do. But in doing a performance, you need to make sure that whatever that task is, that it's actually going to be used. I loved when I could, overseas, when I could teach science students who were going to study science and they actually had to do research. And so while I'm teaching them English, I forced them to go out and do a research in English. When we talk about an authentic text or an authentic test or activity, we need to make sure that the activity contains language that is natural. Stuff that you would normally see in the target language, in the target culture. And so, again, it's not going to be something that's contrived. When I first started seeing this in the literature years ago, I didn't quite understand until I moved overseas, and I would see non-native speakers trying to create materials, and it didn't sound right, it didn't sound normal. I've seen videos of native speakers taking exams by non-native exams that are written in English, and English tests written by non-native speakers, and there were mistakes and problems, and things didn't sound right. So that's really what is going on here. It's something that should be natural, something you could literally pull out of a newspaper or pull out of a manual because it's natural language, the natural conversation that's going on. You want to make sure that it's natural. That's what really all that they're talking about there. You should also include linguistic terms or linguistic items in context. If you're dealing with specific vocabulary you want somebody to use, again, you're dealing with medical English, and you want people to understand and use these terms, well, they should be used in context. They shouldn't be something that's isolated. Okay, and that's not just the specialized vocabulary like in medicine. Anything within the trunk of the vocabulary tree where, that core 3,000 words, they should also be used in context, not isolated. The context is going to provide them opportunities to understand and learn as well, just like we try to understand and learn a new word because it's in context. Lastly, we should have tasks that replicate real-world tasks, activities that they're actually going to be using when they're out in the real world. Another example would be I had a student who was going to Australia for a couple of months and didn't know any English, but he wanted to be able to go there and go to a restaurant or go to a hotel, and he wanted those stock phrases and comments and things so that he could get about just knowing those certain things. These are often things that you see on those pre-recorded, audio-only learning systems. But they were real-world tasks, and you set them up. So when you're creating a task, make sure it's something that is actually usable in the real world. Another quote here. Due to the drawbacks in standardized testing, performance-based assessments grow in popularity, and that's very true. Typical performance-based assessments encapsulate tasks that incorporate whole language. They use higher-order thinking skills and are meaningful, engaging, and authentic. The assessments can focus both on process and product. That's basically all that we've talked about up until now. The only thing we didn't talk about is that it uses whole language. And part of the assessment that you're going to be looking at with performance-based is not just the reading or the writing or do they know the grammar, but it's everything in concert, whole language. And performance-based assessments often do that. Students are going to be doing a presentation. They're going to be giving a speech, and maybe at a speech contest or doing a presentation for a classroom. Well, that's going to entail reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So everything is being put together there. Note, teachers should approach performance-based assessments in an objective manner in order to increase reliability. How do you be more objective? You can't just say, hey, job well done. It's probably a good idea to have rubrics. Rubrics can be used to define those areas that you want to evaluate. It's going to allow you to numeralize these alternative assessments. Okay, it's going to be done to increase reliability. So you break things down into a better sense. You break things down into that are not numeralized, that are not digitized into some digital format. And that's really what digital music is all about. Years ago, they had digital music, and digital music was basically, here's a sound wave, right? And what they did was they took the sound wave and they digitized it. They tried to make little dots, right? Like this, they made all these little dots so that things would fit in, and eventually, to our ear, it sounded as if it's regular sound, but it's been digitized. So because it's digitized, we can put it into some digital format as opposed to a recorded analog format. That's what we're doing here with rubrics. We're taking these less clearly defined things, and we're putting values to them. We're adding numbers to them so that we can try to evaluate them better. Rubrics are an invaluable tool at evaluating performance assessment and provide a rich description for students to use as a guide to improving their performance. What is that? Well, that's again some type of a diagnostic. Warning! Rubrics can be used as a drawback as well. Creating a rubric should take time and thought and detail. But what happens is that people start using rubrics and they're just click, 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 click. They're not really giving much thought to what these meanings are, and that can take away from the value, the diagnostic value, and also the truthfulness, the reliability of the assessment. So be careful that when you're using a rubric, you're actually thinking about all the details that are encased therein. Performance-based assessment ideas here. For example, a portfolio. A collection of activities and or materials or projects that students have done, right? And they're going to be collecting them. They can reflect on them. They can reassess them. They can document them. A successful portfolio development, you've got some guidelines here. You should state objectives clearly. What are you using it for? How are you collecting it? Why are you collecting it? What are the things that need to be done, right? Give guidelines on what materials they're supposed to include. Communicate assessment criteria to the students. Make sure that the students know what the rubric and the objectives are in the grading process so that they know, again, they can plan ahead and they can prepare in good time. Include class time for the development of the portfolio. Now, I look at this and I think, especially at the initial stages, they should know what's going on. Later on, of course, you can take that time away, provided that they don't need you in the classroom. For me, class time should be used for things where they absolutely need you. Obviously, they need to claim some ownership over their work, and so you make them work outside of class. But as far as giving them portfolio time, absolutely, so that they can learn and how to do the process themselves. And once they've learned that process, then you can push things off. As far as reviewing and giving washback, that's something that you can and probably should do during class time as well. Giving good washback for the students is going to be invaluable because they're going to learn what their strengths and their weaknesses are. Some other types of performance-based assessments are things like journals. Journals can provide some other types of description and also an assessment of their abilities. In a journal, they can write down their feelings, their thoughts, ideas about their grammar, about whatever that they're doing, and it's not going to be something that's going to necessarily impact their grades. I can use it as an assessment, however. I can also incorporate the knowledge gained through a journal to enhance student learning. This is one of the great benefits that I think that's involved. I can use what I see inside the journal to improve the opportunities in class, right? I can introduce them to the concept of journaling. I can have them, describe what the requirements are for journaling, and I can give them some feedback in the journal if they so desire. I can give them encouragement, or I can just let them write. That can be up to them as well. The other thing you can do are conferences and interviews. Basically where I'm talking with a student and I'm giving them thoughts and ideas and suggestions. Conferences are generally surrounded around a paper or a project specifically that they need to be doing. But I can do it, generally that's what they are. An interview is when it's not necessarily surrounding a particular activity or a particular project. But for both of these, I can use them so that I can encourage students and I can provide diagnostic information for them so that they can see what their difficulties are, see what their strengths are, and then, of course, work to improve whatever work that they are doing. Lastly, observations. I actually enjoy observations in a language classroom because I don't necessarily need to have my students even know what I'm doing. They're just using language in the natural setting, and I'm observing, yes, that they're doing this or they're not doing this, and I can, again, use this information to help me improve the class, strengthen the class, or I can also use this to talk to the students, actually present it to them. This is what I observed. again, to help them learn language. Observations enable teachers to assess students in a natural environment while the students are unaware of the assessment being made. Observations can be marked down on a checklist or put on a sheet. Recording observations should include, again, clearly defined components that are being observed, whether it's a linguistic term or a linguistic, grammar use or often used phrase, or a lexical item, or a learning strategy. You can check these things off. Yes, they're doing this. They're learning this. And you ought to have it clearly defined, especially if it's stuff that you're actually doing in class. And as I said before, you can generally they're not stuff that you show your students, but I can also show this to students, and they say, "Oh, I can see where I've been doing this, or I need to do this because of the observations." The nice thing about the observations are that students aren't aware, therefore they're just using language in real time, and it's more their natural language use as opposed to trying to finagle language in order to get a grade type of thing, because they don't know what's going on. Lastly, we've got about. Lastly, we want to talk here about self and peer assessment. Peer assessment, depending on the students that you have, can be a great thing. There are some people who do not like peer assessment because they're afraid or they don't trust other students. Typically, I find this the case with upper-level students trust other upper-level students, but they don't necessarily trust lower-level students. That being the case, doing a peer assessment is an advantage not only for the student receiving the assessment, but also the student doing the assessment. Because you can learn from one another. Iron sharpens iron. So I read somebody else's paper as a low-level language learner, and I say, "Ooh, I like how he combines these. I'm going to learn. I'm going to use that." So there's definitely benefits there with that type of peer assessment. Self-assessment at the same time, we're now dealing with metacognitive abilities, and we can now look at a rubric or look at the objectives in the assessment and actually see whether I'm doing that, helping me to become a better writer, a better speaker, because I can realize, oh, look, I'm supposed to be using this type of thing in an introduction, and I realize I didn't have it in there, and now I can go back and forth. So that's good for self-assessment. Direct assessment of specific skills in the database. Again, be in the databases. Again, be specific as to what you want them to be evaluating. Indirect assessment of competence within the activity. Okay, so watching what they're doing and are they completing the task or not. And that's not necessarily the language that's involved there. Metacognitive assessment. They get to assess their own stuff. Socioaffective assessment. They assess other students. They assess cultural interactions. It's very interesting for me as a I guess I could say as a U.S. citizen when I see different cultures, and especially cultures of people who don't want to have somebody lose face or don't want to embarrass someone, don't want to criticize someone, how they react when they have to do an assessment. And so that's something else that you can look at. It's how someone, if you're going to be in this country, you have to be in this culture, you need to be more this way, you need to be more that way. Or at least recognize that's how the majority of the culture will work. So you can also do an assessment regarding socioaffective. Lastly, student-generated tests. I have seldom done this, but I have friends who do this a lot. Students create their own questions, and he hands them into the teacher, and the teacher collects them and uses them on tests. Again, it's showing ownership. It's showing commitment to their own language learning. Helps them become more independent learners. Helps them understand what types of questions to be making. It's a great way to provide assessment by allowing students to generate their own tests. And that's all I have for this chapter. Again, I do thank you for stopping by. If you have any questions, you can certainly shoot me a message down below, or you can send me an email. Thanks for stopping by, and I hope to talk to you later. Bye-bye now.